The starship Horizon drifted through the endless black void of deep space. Captain Jake stood at the front of the bridge with his hands clasped behind his back. He stared at the where millions of stars glittered like scattered diamonds against the darkness. 3 years had passed since they left Earth. 3 years of searching for something, anything, that would prove humanity was not alone in the universe. They had found nothing. Every planet they visited was either dead rock or toxic gas. Every signal they chased turned out to be natural radiation or echoes of their own transmissions bouncing back from distant nebulas. The crew was tired. Some had started to lose hope. Jake could see it in their eyes during morning briefings. The spark that had driven them to volunteer for this mission was fading day by day. Lieutenant Amy sat at the communications console on the left side of the bridge. She was young, barely 28, but she had earned her position through skill and dedication. Her fingers moved across the controls as she monitored the usual streams of cosmic noise. Static, background radiation, the whispers of dying stars, nothing new, nothing interesting. Then something changed. Amy leaned forward in her chair. Her eyes narrowed as she studied the waveform on her screen. It was different from the random patterns she had grown accustomed to. This signal had structure. It had rhythm. It repeated at precise intervals like a heartbeat echoing across the void. She ran the signal through the analysis software 3 times before she trusted herself to speak. Her voice came out steady despite the excitement building in her chest. Captain turned to look at her. The bridge fell silent as every officer stopped what they were doing. The signal was real. It was artificial. Someone had created it with purpose and intention. Chief Science Officer Ben Carter rushed from his station to stand beside Amy. He was an older man with gray hair and glasses that he constantly pushed up his nose. His hands trembled slightly as he examined the data. In all his years of research, he had never seen anything like this. The signal contained mathematical sequences that were too complex to be natural, prime numbers, patterns, geometric ratios that only an intelligent mind could arrange. But that was not the most shocking discovery. Buried within the transmission were biological markers, genetic sequences, DNA patterns that Ben recognized immediately because he had studied them his entire career. These were human genes, not similar to human genes, not close to human genes. They were human genes with only minor variations. Ben looked up at the captain with an expression that mixed wonder with confusion. Somewhere out there, in a region of space that no Earth ship had ever visited, there were beings that shared human biology. They were not aliens. They were people, or something very close to people. Commander Lisa Grant stepped forward from her position at the tactical station. She was a tall woman with sharp features and a calm voice that could steady the most frightened crew member during a crisis. She asked the obvious question: how was this possible? Humanity had only achieved interstellar travel within the last century. There was no way humans could have reached this distant corner of the galaxy. Ben shook his head slowly. He had no explanation. The evidence everything they knew about human history and space exploration. Yet the data was clear and undeniable. Captain made his decision quickly. He ordered the navigation officer to plot a course toward the signal's origin. The source was located in a star system approximately 3 months away at maximum speed. They would have to push the engines hard, but the Horizon was built for exactly this kind of mission. The crew responded with renewed energy. The fatigue that had weighed them down seemed to lift as word spread through the ship. They had found something. After 3 years of disappointment, they finally had a destination worth reaching. Jake returned to his quarters that night but could not sleep. He lay on his bed and stared at the ceiling while his mind raced through possibilities. Had Earth sent colony ships in the distant past that were somehow erased from historical records? Had another branch of humanity evolved separately on a different world? Were these beings truly human, or just similar enough to fool their instruments? He thought about his family back on Earth. His daughter would be 12 years old now. She had cried when he left, begging him to stay. He had promised her that he would return with stories of wonders beyond imagination. Now it seemed that promise might actually come true. The following weeks passed slowly as the horizon pushed deeper into unexplored territory. Amy continued to monitor the signal, noting that it grew stronger as they approached. Ben spent every waking hour analyzing the genetic data, finding more connections to human biology with each examination. The crew held meetings to discuss what they might find. Some imagined a peaceful civilization eager to welcome their long-lost relatives. Others worried about hostile forces that might view Earth as a threat. Security, Chief Danny quietly increased combat drills and checked the weapon systems twice daily. Lisa Grant organized cultural preparation sessions. If they were going to meet another human civilization, they needed to be ready for anything. Different values, different customs, different ways of thinking that might seem strange or even offensive to Earth sensibilities. Jake listened to all opinions but kept his own thoughts private. He was the captain. His job was to lead, not to speculate. Whatever waited for them at the end of this journey, he would face it with open eyes and steady hands. The signal continued to pulse through the darkness, guiding them forward like a lighthouse calling ships to shore. Each day brought them closer to an answer that would change everything humanity believed about itself. On the final night before arrival, Jake stood alone on the observation deck. The target star gleamed in the distance, brighter now than all the others around it. Somewhere near that star, people who shared his species were waiting. He did not know if they would be friends or enemies. He did not know if they would be welcoming or hostile. He only knew that tomorrow, humanity would learn it was not alone. The universe had just become a much more interesting place. The horizon dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the system. What the crew saw through made them forget to breathe for several long seconds. A massive civilization spread across the space before them. Orbital stations, the size of small moons, circled a beautiful blue-green planet. Hundreds of ships moved between the structures in patterns that spoke of order and purpose. The technology was elegant and advanced, far beyond anything Earth had achieved. Captain Jake gripped the armrest of his command chair. His heart pounded against his ribs as he studied the display. These people had built an empire among the stars while Earth was still struggling with its first interstellar vessels. The gap between their civilizations was enormous. Lieutenant Amy reported that they were being scanned by multiple sources. The alien ships had detected them immediately and were analyzing every system on the horizon. Jake ordered the crew to remain calm and make no aggressive movements. They had come in peace, and they would act like it. A single vessel broke away from the formation and moved toward them. It was shaped like a silver teardrop, smooth and graceful, with no visible weapons or engines. The ship seemed to glide through space as if gravity itself had no power over it. The communication console lit up with an incoming transmission. Amy looked at Jake for permission. He nodded, and she opened the channel. The flickered and then displayed a face that made the entire bridge crew gasp. The being looking back at them was human. There was no doubt about it. 2 eyes, a nose, a mouth, and all the familiar features of a human face. But there were differences too. The skin held a faint golden shimmer that caught the light. The eyes reflected like polished copper, bright and intense. The bone structure was slightly different, more refined, as if someone had taken the human form and perfected it. A woman spoke from the screen. Her voice was melodic and clear, translated through some technology that the Horizon systems could barely process. She introduced herself as Sira, High Ambassador of the Dominion. She welcomed the visitors from distant Earth and expressed surprise at their arrival. Jake stood from his chair and introduced himself and his mission. He explained that they had followed the signal, hopping to find intelligent life. He had not expected to find other humans. Sira smiled at his words, but there was something in that smile that Jake could not quite read. She explained the history of her people in broad terms. They were descendants of colonists who had fled Earth over 12,000 years ago. A catastrophic event had threatened to destroy all life on the home planet. A small group had escaped on experimental ships and traveled far beyond the reach of that disaster. They had evolved differently. Genetic engineering had enhanced their bodies and minds. They lived for 300 years or more. Disease and weakness had been eliminated from their population. They had built a civilization that spanned dozens of star systems. Jake listened with growing amazement. Earth had no record of any exodus 12,000 years ago. Whatever catastrophe the ancestors of the had fled, it had apparently been survived by some portion of humanity. The two branches had developed separately for all this time, unaware of each other's existence. Sierra invited the crew of the Horizon to visit the. She promised them safe passage and the opportunity to learn about their long-lost relatives. Jake accepted the invitation without hesitation. This was exactly what they had hoped to find. The Horizon followed the silver ship down toward the planet. As they descended through the atmosphere, the crew pressed against every window to see what waited below. Cities floated in the clouds, held aloft by technology that seemed like magic. Towers of crystal and metal rose toward the sky, gleaming in the light of the golden sun. Rivers of energy flowed between structures, connecting everything in a web of power that pulsed with life. Commander Lisa Grant stood beside Jake as they watched the scenery unfold. She whispered that it was beautiful, and Jake had to agree. They had built a paradise that made Earth's greatest cities look like primitive villages. They landed on a platform in the capital city. Sierra waited for them with a delegation of officials, all bearing the same golden skin and copper eyes. The air smelled sweet and clean, filtered to perfection. The temperature was exactly comfortable, controlled by systems that monitored every aspect of the environment. Jake stepped off the ship first. He extended his hand in the traditional Earth greeting. Sierra looked at his hand for a moment with curiosity before reaching out and clasping it. Her grip was firm but gentle, and her skin was warm to the touch. The delegation led them through the city on a tour that lasted several hours. They showed them hospitals where no one was sick, schools where children learned at speeds that seemed impossible, factories where machines built other machines with perfect precision. Everything was orderly, everything was controlled, everything was perfect. But Security Chief Danny noticed things that troubled him. The people in the streets moved with purpose but without joy. They smiled when appropriate and spoke when spoken to, but there was something missing from their expressions, something hollow. He mentioned this to Jake in a quiet moment. The captain nodded but said nothing. He had noticed it too. They had achieved wonders that Earth could only dream about, but somewhere along the way they had lost something that could not be measured or. That night, Jake lay awake in the guest quarters provided for him. The bed was softer than anything he had ever felt. The room adjusted to his every preference without being asked. Yet he could not shake the feeling that something was wrong beneath the golden surface of this perfect world. Tomorrow would bring more revelations. Tomorrow would show them what they truly wanted from their primitive cousins. Jake closed his eyes and tried to rest, but sleep came slowly in that strange and beautiful place. 3 weeks passed on the. The crew of the Horizon split into groups to study different aspects of this advanced civilization. Scientists examined technology. Engineers analyzed construction methods. Medical officers explored healthcare facilities. Everyone was learning, but not everyone liked what they found. Doctor spent most of her time in the medical archives, studying the history of genetic engineering. She was a dedicated physician who had joined the mission to help treat any ailments the crew might face in deep space. What she discovered in those archives kept her awake at night. They had spent thousands of years modifying their genetic code. They had removed diseases one by one until sickness became a forgotten concept. They had extended until death from natural causes happened only after centuries of existence. But they had not stopped there. They had targeted emotions. Fear was deemed a weakness that led to poor decisions, so they suppressed the genes that caused it. Anger was considered destructive, so they dampened the neurological pathways that produced it. Grief was viewed as an inefficient response to loss, so they modified the brain chemistry that created it. Read the records with growing horror. They had not simply improved themselves, they had hollowed themselves out. They had removed the messy, painful, beautiful chaos of human emotion and replaced it with something calm and controlled and empty. She shared her findings with Captain Jake during a private meeting. Jake listened without interruption, his face growing more troubled with each revelation. When she finished, he sat in silence for a long moment before thanking her for the information. Meanwhile, Engineer Cole was having his own difficulties. He had been assigned to work with technicians on a cultural exchange project. They wanted to understand Earth technology and was supposed to explain how human engineering worked. The exchanges quickly became frustrating. The engineers looked at Earth designs with barely concealed contempt. They called the systems crude and inefficient. They pointed out flaws and weaknesses with the precision of computers identifying errors in code. Defended his work with pride. Earth engineers had built starships with limited resources and incomplete knowledge. They had solved problems through creativity and determination. Their solutions might not be elegant, but they worked. They got the job done. They did not understand this argument. For them, efficiency was the only measure that mattered. A system either performed at optimal levels or it was worthless. The idea of valuing effort or creativity over results seemed primitive and foolish. Walked away from those sessions feeling angry and insulted. He was not alone. Other crew members reported similar experiences. They were polite, but their politeness carried a weight of judgment. They saw the humans from Earth as interesting specimens, perhaps, but certainly not as equals. The tension reached a breaking point at a formal gathering hosted by Sira. She had invited the senior officers of the Horizon to dine with the ruling council of the Dominion. The meal was exquisite, and the conversation was cordial until Sira made an announcement that changed everything. The Dominion had decided to extend an offer of assistance to Earth. They would share their technology, their knowledge, and their resources with their long-lost relatives. They would help humanity advance by thousands of years in a single generation. There was only one condition. Humanity would have to undergo genetic correction. Sira explained this as if she were offering a gift. They would remove the defects from human DNA. They would eliminate the flaws that caused war and conflict and suffering. They would make Earth's people perfect, just as they had made themselves perfect. Jake felt the anger rise in his chest, hot and immediate. He forced himself to remain calm as he asked Sira to clarify what she meant by defects. She listed them without hesitation: aggression, fear, jealousy, excessive attachment, irrational hope, the emotions that drove humans to destroy each other and themselves. These were bugs in the human operating system, and they knew how to fix them. Commander Lisa Grant spoke before Jake could respond. She asked what would happen if humanity refused this generous offer. Sira's copper eyes flickered with something that might have been disappointment. She said that refusal would be unfortunate. Earth would continue to struggle with its primitive limitations while the Dominion watched from afar. Eventually, humanity would destroy itself through war or environmental collapse. They had seen it happen to other species throughout the galaxy. Jake stood from his chair. The room fell silent as every turned to look at him. He thanked Sira for the offer but declined it on behalf of his crew and his world. The qualities she called defects were the same qualities that had driven humanity to survive ice ages and plagues and wars. Fear taught them caution. Anger gave them strength. Grief reminded them of what they valued. These emotions were not bugs. They were features. They were the core of what made humans human. Sira's expression did not change, but something shifted in her copper eyes. She accepted his decision with formal grace and ended the dinner early. The crew of the Horizon returned to their quarters under the watchful gaze of guards who had not been there before. Jake gathered his senior officers that night. He told them to prepare for departure. The alliance they had hoped to build was not going to happen. They wanted to help humanity by erasing everything that made humanity worth saving. They would leave in the morning. They would return to Earth with knowledge of what existed among the stars. And they would warn their people about the golden civilization that wanted to fix them, whether they wanted fixing or not. The night passed slowly. Outside the windows, the perfect city glittered under the light of unfamiliar stars. It was beautiful, it was impressive, and it was a future that Jake would fight with every breath to prevent. The Horizon lifted off from the capital just as the sun rose over the crystal towers. Captain Jake watched the beautiful city shrink below them with mixed feelings. Part of him wished things had gone differently. Part of him was glad to leave. They had barely cleared the atmosphere when the sensors detected movement. Lieutenant Amy reported multiple contacts approaching from all directions. Within minutes, the Horizon was surrounded by a fleet of warships. Sierra appeared on the. Her face showed no emotion, but her words carried a cold edge that had not been there before. She informed them that their departure had not been authorized. The Dominion Council had decided that the crew of the Horizon would remain as guests until a proper arrangement could be made. Jake asked what kind of arrangement she meant. Sierra explained that Earth humans were too valuable to simply let go. Their unmodified genetics contained information that they had lost through of engineering. Their chaotic minds might hold solutions to problems that perfect logic could not solve. The Dominion intended to study them, to learn from them, and eventually to guide them toward a better path. Jake understood what she was really saying. They were not guests, they were prisoners, specimens to be examined and improved whether they wanted it or not. He cut the transmission without responding. Commander Lisa Grant was already at the tactical station, assessing the situation. The numbers were not good. 12 warships against 1 Earth vessel. The enemy ships were faster, better armed, and crewed by beings who had been engineered for optimal performance. Security Chief Danny stepped forward with a grim expression. He said they had 2 choices: surrender and hope for the best, or fight and probably die. Jake looked at his crew, at the faces that had followed him across the galaxy in search of something wonderful. They had found it, and it had turned out to be a trap. He asked for a third option. Chief Engineer Greg Palmer spoke up from the engineering station. He had been studying technology during their stay and had noticed something interesting. Their systems were incredibly advanced but also incredibly standardized. Every ship used the same frequencies. Every network followed the same protocols. They had optimized everything to work together in perfect harmony. That optimization was a weakness. Greg proposed a plan that was desperate and dangerous and absolutely insane. The Horizon would generate electromagnetic pulses on frequencies that would disrupt communications and targeting systems. Amy would broadcast interference patterns designed to confuse their networked weapons. Danny would prepare boarding defense teams in case they tried to take the ship by force. It was not a plan for victory. It was a plan for chaos, and chaos was something they had forgotten how to handle. Jake gave the order. The bridge erupted into activity as every crew member prepared for the fight of their lives. The fleet moved in with mechanical precision. Their weapons locked onto the Horizon from multiple angles. Sierra's voice came through the communication system one more time, offering them a final chance to surrender peacefully. Greg triggered the electromagnetic pulse. The effect was immediate and spectacular. Ships stuttered and wobbled as their systems crashed and rebooted. Targeting arrays lost their focus. Communication channels filled with static. The perfect formation dissolved into confusion as each vessel struggled to reestablish contact with the others. Amy broadcast her interference patterns, shifting frequencies in random bursts that the computers could not predict. Their algorithms were designed to analyze and counter known threats. They had no programming for attacks that made no logical sense. Jake ordered the helm to fly directly toward the lead ship. It was a move that tactical wisdom. No sensible captain would charge into the teeth of superior firepower, but they had not prepared for an enemy that did not follow sensible patterns. The Horizon weaved between the larger vessels, using their bulk as shields against friendly fire. Danny coordinated damage control teams that patched holes and rerouted power faster than the gunners could create new problems. Every crew member worked beyond their limits, pushing through fear and exhaustion with sheer determination. Sierra's flagship managed to restore partial systems. She locked weapons onto the Horizon and prepared to fire. But before she could give the order, Greg triggered a second pulse directly into her ship's engineering section. The pulse overloaded critical systems throughout the vessel. Lights flickered. Engines died. The mighty flagship drifted helplessly as its perfect technology failed against an attack that no rational mind would have designed. Jake opened a channel to the disabled ship. He addressed Sierra directly, and his voice was calm despite the chaos around him. He told her that humanity was not perfect. They made mistakes. They got scared. They sometimes did stupid things for stupid reasons, but they also adapted. They survived. They found ways to win when winning seemed impossible. They had spent 12,000 years removing the chaos from their society. They had built something beautiful and impressive and ultimately fragile. Their perfect systems could not handle the unexpected because they had eliminated the parts of themselves that knew how to improvise. Jake offered Sierra a choice. She could continue this fight and watch her fleet fall apart ship by ship, or she could accept that her long-lost cousins had something to offer after all, not genetic material, not specimens to study, partners who could show them what they had forgotten. The communication channel remained silent for a long moment. Then Sierra gave the order for her remaining ships to stand down. The battle was over. The Horizon drifted among the disabled vessels, battered but unbroken. Jake looked at his crew and felt a pride that no words could express. They had faced an enemy that should have crushed them without effort, and they had won through nothing but stubbornness, creativity, and the refusal to accept defeat. Humanity had passed its first test among the stars. 6 months passed after the battle in the system. The Horizon remained in orbit around the while repairs were completed and negotiations continued. What had begun as a confrontation slowly transformed into something unexpected. A conversation between two branches of humanity that had been separated for 12,000 years. Sierra requested a private meeting with Captain Jake. She came aboard the Horizon alone, without guards or escorts, wearing simple clothing instead of her formal ambassador robes. Jake met her in the observation lounge where stars filled the viewport like scattered diamonds. She stood in silence for a long moment, staring at the view. When she finally spoke, her voice carried something that Jake had not heard from him before: uncertainty. The battle had shaken the foundations of society. For the first time in centuries, they had encountered something they could not predict or control. Their perfect algorithms had failed against an enemy that refused to behave rationally. Their optimized warriors had been outmaneuvered by opponents who rewrote the rules in real time. The experience had awakened something within the population. Emotions that had been suppressed for generations began to surface. Some people felt fear for the first time in their lives. Others experienced anger or frustration or confusion. The genetic modifications had not eliminated these feelings entirely. They had merely buried them deep beneath layers of engineered calm. Sierra admitted that she herself had felt something during the battle. When Jake's ship charged toward her flagship against all logic, she had experienced a sensation that she could not identify. It took her weeks of meditation to realize what it was. Admiration. She had admired the courage and creativity of the Earth humans. She had admired their refusal to surrender even when defeat seemed certain. She had admired qualities that her people had spent trying to eliminate because they believed those qualities made them weak. Jake listened without interruption. He understood how difficult this confession must be for someone who had been raised to view emotion as a defect. Sira continued. A movement had begun among the younger generations they called themselves the Awakened. They wanted to reconnect with the full spectrum of human experience, even the painful parts. They believed that their ancestors had made a mistake by trading emotional depth for efficiency and control. The ruling council was divided on how to respond. Some wanted to suppress the movement before it spread further. Others saw it as an opportunity for growth and renewal. The debate had paralyzed the government for months. Jake asked what Sira wanted from him. She turned from the viewport to face him directly. Her copper eyes reflected the starlight, and for the first time, Jake saw genuine emotion in their depths. She wanted his help. Doctor had been developing a proposal during the months of repair work. She suggested a cultural exchange program that would benefit both civilizations, would travel to Earth to study unmodified humanity in its natural environment. They would experience the chaos and creativity and emotional richness that their own society had lost. In return, humans would learn from the technological achievements of the Dominion. Neither side would be asked to change who they were. They would simply learn from each other. Jake had reviewed the proposal carefully. It was ambitious and risky, and exactly the kind of bridge that both peoples needed. He told Sira that he would support the exchange program on one condition. They had to accept humanity as partners, not as specimens or projects to be improved. They had to respect the choices that Earth made about its own future, even if those choices seemed irrational or inefficient. Sira agreed without hesitation. She extended her hand in the Earth greeting that Jake had taught her months ago. He clasped it firmly, and they shook on the deal. The following weeks moved quickly. Representatives from both civilizations drafted a formal accord. There were arguments and compromises and moments when the entire negotiation seemed ready to collapse. But in the end, they produced a document that both sides could accept. Captain Jake and High Ambassador Sira signed the accord in a ceremony broadcast to both worlds. Earth watched from billions of screens as their explorers made history among distant stars. The population watched with mixed reactions, some hopeful and others fearful of what changes the future might bring. The Horizon prepared to return home. Its mission had been to find intelligent life in the universe, and it had succeeded beyond anyone's imagination. They were not bringing back alien artifacts or exotic technologies. They were bringing back something far more valuable. They were bringing back family. Lieutenant Amy received a message from Earth just before departure. The news of the encounter had spread across the planet, and the response was overwhelming. People who had never cared about space exploration were suddenly fascinated by the stars. Children asked their parents about and dreamed of traveling to distant worlds. Humanity had been reminded that the universe was vast and full of wonders waiting to be discovered. Jake stood on the bridge as the Horizon's engines powered up for the long journey home. His crew worked at their stations with quiet efficiency, but he could see the pride in their faces. They had done something remarkable. They had proven that humanity deserved its place among the stars. Sira's ship escorted them to the edge of the system. She sent one final message before they parted ways. She thanked Jake for showing her people what they had forgotten. She promised that they would honor the accord and work toward a future where both branches of humanity could thrive together. Jake replied with a simple Earth expression that he had to explain for several minutes before she understood it. He told her to take care of herself. She responded with something that might have been a smile before her ship turned and disappeared into the distance. The Horizon jumped to faster-than-light speed, leaving the system behind. Ahead of them lay 3 months of travel through empty space. Behind them lay a civilization that would never be the same after meeting its chaotic cousins from Earth. Jake retreated to his quarters and finally allowed himself to rest. He thought about his daughter waiting for him on Earth. He had promised her stories of wonders beyond imagination, and now he had stories that would take years to tell. Humanity was no longer alone in the universe. They had found family among the stars, and that family had reminded them of something important. The qualities that made humans difficult and messy and unpredictable were also the qualities that made them strong. Their flaws were not bugs to be fixed. They were features to be celebrated. The journey home passed peacefully. When the horizon finally entered Earth orbit, a fleet of ships came out to greet them. Messages poured in from every corner of the planet, congratulating the crew on their historic achievement. Jake looked down at the blue marble that had given birth to his species. Somewhere out there, beyond the edge of known space, another branch of humanity was looking up at the same stars with new eyes. The story of humanity was just beginning its next chapter, and for the first time in a very long time, it was a story of hope.